Tonight, problems continue to mount around the executive table with a lack of money preventing much-needed change. But Conor Murphy tells me all Stormont's ministers are pulling in the same direction.
I have to say myself, I've been an executive a number of times. There is more collaborative working on this executive than I've ever seen in any previous executive.
With two of the city deals under threat, we hear how that's left some developments up in the air.
We've already got a major American multinational company that has capital value of 177 billion US dollars. Visited Coleraine this week, very excited about that project. That project's now at risk.
For the small saving that the UK government will get from the cut, they're actually cutting off their nose to spite their face, because what could have been generated would have been far in excess of that.
Plus, will the DUP take on board the recommendations put forward by one former insider? We'll ask two people with an in-depth knowledge of the party what they think. Hello. Joe Biden promised billions of dollars of investment for Northern Ireland on the return of devolution, but Stormont is cash-strapped and struggling to balance the books. The Economy Minister is just back from North America, where he says there's considerable interest in investing here. But when I spoke to Conor Murphy earlier, I began by asking him about the concerns expressed by housing developers yesterday at his colleague, the Infrastructure Minister's suggestion that they should be asked to pay substantially more to upgrade the water system here. Does Mr. Murphy agree with Mr. O'Dowd's approach?
Everyone in the executive agrees that, I think everyone in the Assembly agrees, that water and sewage infrastructure has been underfunded for many years. We all agree that if our plans for economic growth and for more housing, for more infrastructure around our public services is to be built, we need significant investment into that. The question, of course, is finding the money to do that. But I think there is a very strong agreement that we need significant investment. The contribution from developers and other people has been a part of that for some time, but we need significant investment from the executive.
But those who represent the construction sector say that developers being asked to pay at that level could be a real challenge to small companies in particular.
Well, it could, and we have to obviously measure that. So we want to see houses built both in the public sector housing, and we want to see development continue. The opportunity for growth is there. And so, of course, that's a matter for the Department of Infrastructure to measure. Sure. There have always been cost contributions. As I said, people contribute to roads and other infrastructure that's necessary for housing developments. But we still need to invest in the water and sewage infrastructure. As an executive, we need to find the money to do that. We recognise that that is creating a pinch point in terms of development, in terms of the public housing that we want to build, and we do need, and all of the executive ministers are agreed on that, because every one of us have ambition within our own departments for development to happen around certain areas, and we know that unless we get the water and sewage infrastructure right, that may well be restricted from happening into the future.
Yeah, the difficulty is to what extent everybody's thought about this and thought through the implications of it, because whenever he was asked about this yesterday, Mr. O'Dowd didn't really have an answer to the question that was asked in the committee, and whenever these concerns were raised, he said, that's something I'll look into. So it doesn't suggest a strategy that has been fully thought through, does it?
Well, as I say, there always have been contributions. I suppose if there's an argument...
Yeah, but not at this level.
No, if there's an argument around the level, and undoubtedly, as the public sector investment has reduced with cuts and cuts and cuts over many years, then perhaps Water Service have been looking to supplement that with greater input from developers themselves. And if you're getting to a point now where that balance is tipping in the wrong direction, I'm sure John O'Dowd will want to look at that. But he is arguing and fighting very strongly for sufficient investment through his department to try and build a water and sewage infrastructure in the first instance, and I think that will have an implication for how much is required from the private sector.
Of course, it's not just about housing, is it? Because if you were the chief executive of a big international company and you were thinking of investing tens of billions of pounds in a new plant here that would employ hundreds of people, and you were told Northern Ireland's wastewater infrastructure could take decades to fix, and there's currently no plan in place to do that, you would take your money somewhere else, wouldn't you? Well,
there is money being invested in the wastewater infrastructure every day. You know, there is investment there. There isn't sufficient investment in there, and the lack of investment over many years is creating a real pinch point crisis in terms of development. Of course, I know of people in my own constituency who are looking to open up factories and are being held back because of problems in relation to wastewater treatment and are trying to accommodate that and trying to move.
It's a real problem for you as Economy Minister. You want these companies to open factories and they can't.
That's what I say. Every minister, ironically, every minister around the executive table wants money for the infrastructure minister, because we recognise with all of our ambitions through our departmental responsibilities are dependent on ensuring that John O'Dowd has sufficient money to make the wastewater infrastructure system be improved to the extent that it needs to be improved. So we all recognise that that's a problem. We all want to see investment in that. That's why we continue to argue for more money into our public services to try and ensure that we can make that investment, because it is a restrictive, not just in terms of public housing, which is obviously critical for people, but in terms of economic growth, it's restrictive if we can't get facilities built. We want to invest in more land to support regional balance and our economic growth across Fermanagh, Tyrone, Derry, parts of Armagh. But if we don't have service sites with wastewater infrastructure, we won't be able to encourage people to set up businesses there. So it is an impact very directly on our economy and our economic growth potential, and that's why it needs to be resolved very quickly.
Yeah, his critics might say that he should think about mutualising the water system in Northern Ireland, as has been done elsewhere successfully. But of course, he's dead set against that, and he's not prepared to even entertain a conversation about that. I mean, I suppose that's a conversation for another day, and if I had him here, I'd talk about it in a bit more detail. Well, there are other options that he's just simply closed down.
Well, no, I do think genuinely we were looking at the housing executive, the structure of Waterservice, to see how we can allow it to raise its own money, which isn't on the books of the executive, and I think John is open to that idea.
Well, that's mutualisation, and he said he doesn't want to do that.
There are a number of models that you can look at, and I think that's going to be challenging. We're already looking at it in terms of the executive, and I don't doubt that all options will be examined by his department and try and come up with the best one. But I mean, the primary thing we need more money in our public services, and that would in many ways move a long way to try and address the problem in relation to our wastewater infrastructure.
OK, figures published today show that Northern Ireland's economy grew by 0.4% in the second quarter of 2024, but it's a pretty mixed picture, isn't it? It's positive in construction and the services sector, but much less so in retail and in manufacturing. How concerned are you at that uneven performance?
Well, I think our manufacturing and retail sector is getting impacted on by the online, which has become an even greater phenomenon post-pandemic. So everywhere you meet, high streets are struggling. That's a problem the executive recognised right across the board. Our manufacturing is, like all other manufacturing, subject to global pressures in terms of inflationary costs around energy, around materials. So it suffers from that. But we've had an increase in our manufacturing exports by almost 7% last year. So it's not such a bleak picture. There are certain sectors within that are high capital costs that are struggling, and we don't like to see that. We want to see that improve, and that is impacted on by global factors beyond our control. So there are good news stories. Our economy has grown. That is at a higher level than it's grown in Britain, by the way. So there are some good news stories here, because traditionally we have always lagged behind every area. But there are challenges there, and we recognise that there are challenges to be met, and we need to continue to support our manufacturing and other sectors of our economy that aren't growing as well as we would like them to grow.
Because we should be taking advantage at this stage of our unique dual market access, and that should particularly benefit our manufacturing sector. But when you look at those figures, where there's been a little bit of growth, clearly we are not benefiting in the way that people suggested we would do.
Well, if our export and manufacturing is up almost 7%, which is a significant growth over the course of last year, that does suggest that dual market access is improving the picture there. There are certain sectors of manufacturing that are reliant on international markets, on high capital cost goods, that undoubtedly are struggling. We've heard about that in the news, and they're slowing down their work rates, and that market is slowing down internationally for them. And of course, that's a challenge, and we have to help them through that challenge. But we've had the position of dual market access more clearly mapped out now for just about a year. The Invest NI, and that's part of the reason I was in the States and Canada last week, and I'm going to Berlin in another week or two's time. Invest NI have been putting the proposition of what dual market access looks like, both internationally in terms of potential investors, but also to our local companies to get them more into the export phase. So the export companies tend to be more innovative, tend to be more productive, and that's the targets within our economic growth that we want to see.
But we should be doing better, should we not? The services sector has grown by a third since the pandemic. You've talked talked about manufacturing growing by 7%. In February 2023, the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak famously referred to this place as the world's most exciting economic zone. We should be doing better than 7%.
Of course, and we will continue to strive to do better than that.
Why are we not doing better
absolutely.
than that?
Well, the dual market access issue is only in place about a year. It takes to 2025 until it's fully implemented. Some parts of it haven't been implemented yet. So that is a moving and an ongoing development.
Is there any evidence that things are getting better? I mean, for example, you said there you were in North America on that trade mission last week, Chicago and Toronto. Joe Biden was here last year, about 18 months ago, and he said that billions were going to flow from American companies in terms of investment. Well, that hasn't happened.
That was his assessment. I have to say there's a very, very strong level of interest. I spoke to a company this morning who are here, had all of their international people from other offices around the world, and that was the issue that they wanted to talk about, was dual market access. When I was in the States, when I was in Toronto, that's what people want to talk to us about, dual market access. As I say, I'm going to Europe in another week or two's time. Invest are taking, if you like, a roadshow in Europe around Belgium, around Netherlands. We're going to Berlin in a couple of weeks' time. That's what people want to talk to us about. We have done research and presented that as to which sectors would benefit most, because this is about trade and goods. It doesn't work with all sectors. So we've done research and presented that about what sectors in particular would be an advantage most from dual market access. Companies are interested in it. Now they want to know what exactly it means in terms of investment decisions. And you know, investment decisions aren't taken overnight.
No.
They take some time to build up.
But you'd think there have been
a lot
some in the last 12 months since it's got up and running. I mean, you've talked about there being some interest. Interest is not the same as a firm investment commitment.
No, of course it's not. But there have been some, and there are some in the pipeline, and I would hope that there will be some
significant announcements in the pipeline?
Anything, well, let's see. I'm not going to say here now that there are significant announcements. These things take time.
Well, what is in the you're the person who said something's in the pipeline. What's in the pipeline?
Of course, there's been much dialogue and discussion with people who are here, who want to invest further here, but people who are interested in coming here. Invest and I have reported very significant interest in conversations with them around this area. So we know that there's an interest. What we want to do is capitalise on that and confirm people's interest into actual investment decisions. But we also want to help our own indigenous companies to grow. And one of the ways they can grow is get involved in export. And as I say, our export numbers in manufacturing have risen. We want to see that work better and work to our greater advantage in the time ahead.
OK. What about a joined-up approach on the part of executive ministers? Because presumably if you're all singing off the same song sheet, then delivery becomes a lot more straightforward, doesn't it? Your department, of course, has certain discrete responsibilities. Finance will have its areas of responsibility. Infrastructure has its particular priorities, some of which we've already talked about. Should we not be seeing more obvious interdepartmental cooperation as these problems are being tackled? And those three ministers, by the way, just as it happens, are all in the same party. If ever there should be a joined-up approach, it should be with the three of you.
There is, and there are joined-up approaches with myself and other ministers from other parties. I have joint pieces of work with ministers from all parties. And I have to say myself, I've been an executive a number of times, there is more collaborative working on in this executive than I've ever seen in any previous executive. And part of that is that we have very restricted finances, and we know that if we're to try and spread that thin resource and be as effective as we possibly can, then we have to collaborate with each other. We have to work together. So I have joint pieces of work going with Gordon Lyons and the communities, with Andrew Muir, Indira, with John O'Dowd, with Kiva, of course, who has an overarching role in relation to finance and all of those things. There is significant degrees of, I'm doing a joint piece of work with Paul Given in terms of careers advice, because we both have responsibility for education. So there's significant collaborative work going on. It doesn't necessarily make the news all the time, and to be quite honest with you, a lot of journalists are more interested in fights than they are interested in collaborative work. But there's quite a significant amount of collaborative work going on within the executive.
Well, then you'll be glad I'm asking you about collaborative work on this programme tonight.
I'm glad to be able to articulate
and you mentioned Andrew Muir, because he sat in that very seat on this programme last week, and he talked about the challenges he's facing dealing with Lough Neagh, and he said he needs help from his ministerial colleagues to try to sort out the issue of the wastewater infrastructure, which is not his direct responsibility, because he said that negatively impinges on so many policy areas. We've talked about the construction sector, house building, industrial development as well, and he said that that could last 30 years or more. That's how depressing the message was from Andrew Muir last week.
But he also knows, because we had a conversation at the executive table today when he put forward his environmental improvement plan, we talked about Loughney, and he knows that all of the ministers are in support of what he needs to do there. I have offered my support to him. John O'Dowd has offered his support to him. We have offered full support to Andrew for bringing that work forward. And we know that these things will only be tackled by cross-departmental collaborative work, and we are all up for that.
One last thing for now, Minister. The Ulster Unionist Party has indicated that it won't be supporting the latest stage of the budget bill at Stormont. Now, that party has a minister in the executive, Mike Nesbitt, its new leader, is the Health Minister. Can the UUP, in your view, hold a ministerial portfolio in the executive and at the same time vote against the executive's own budget?
Well, I don't believe that the minister responsible will vote against the budget. Whether they vote for it is another matter. Listen, holding a four-party executive together is not easy, but I think it is necessary, and I think it is good for politics in this place that we have all of the parties entitled to be in the executive. So I'm not about setting tests for parties to try and push them in a direction that might see them up and out of the executive. I would prefer that the UUP would vote for them. They know the challenges we're all facing collectively. The very first day the Assembly came back, the first motion it debated, which was supported by all parties and by the opposition, said that we don't have enough money and we need to go and talk to the British government about the underfunding. We have been underfunded, they've recognised that, and we need to tackle that problem. So the UUP know the collective problem we're all facing. I would much prefer that they supported the budget and were on board up, but I'm not about trying to push people in one direction or the other. An inclusive executive is better for society here than parties being forced to opt out of it.
Yeah, you've just been talking about the importance of collaboration within the executive. If an executive minister can't support the executive's own budget, that is the furthest thing on earth from collaboration. I mean, if the UUP can't support the budget bill, should it honestly leave the executive and go into opposition?
Well, it's a matter for the party to decide what they want to do. But I have to say,
what you think.
What I would have to say, I would prefer to see Mike Nesbitt in the executive. I work well with him, as do other ministers work with him, and I think we're a much stronger executive if we have all parties in it. I would prefer that they would take decisions which honestly recognise a collective problem that we all have.
So collective responsibility?
If they want to take a decision which they think is in the political interests of the Ulster Unionist Party, then that's a matter for themselves, and the electorate will ultimately decide on these issues. I would prefer to see all parties working together, and I would prefer to see Mike Nesbitt staying in the executive and working with us, because I think he has a contribution to make, as we all do.
OK, Conor Murphy, do stay with me, but for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, the decision of the UK government to pause 2 of the 4 local city deals here has caused huge uncertainty for those affected by the move. Darren Marshall has been to all 4 corners of the Causeway Coast and Glens Council area to hear about some of the projects now under threat.
This was the vision, a huge investment for the Causeway Coast and Glens region. But this is the reality. Projects at risk, and a protest at Stormont, with ministers, MLAs and local council representatives urging London to release the funds it has paused.
The Causeway Coast and Glens region stretches all the way from Lough Foyle along the North Atlantic coast and from the Glens of Antrim to the foothills of the Spurns. Dungiven was one of the towns earmarked for millions of pounds of investment.
Here, the plan was to improve the look of the town, to open a new remote working hub and to boost the tourism potential as a gateway to the Spurns.
That money was going to be game-changing for Dungiven. It's a small pot of money, but it unlocks so much more potential.
Can you see why the government paused this scheme?
No, it doesn't make an awful lot of sense at the moment. The spending period that they're looking to save money in wouldn't actually be realised in terms of saving the money from the growth deal. We wouldn't actually be putting money on the ground until about 2028, which is outside of the spending period that the Labour government is currently looking to realise savings in.
Up in Coleraine, a new leisure centre and wellbeing hub was a council priority for years. Combined with other projects, it was hoped this would be a regenerational tipping point for the area.
I think the government could have handled it much better. They could have said, it is our intention to proceed, but let's see where the money is. Let's make sure we get them over the line, instead of just putting a pause and adding all that uncertainty into the pot.
You're the local MP for this area. The Finance Minister is also a local rep for this area. Together, what pressure can you put on the UK government?
Well, working collaboratively, we can bring some pressure, and we're doing that, and I think everybody has been working collaboratively to do that. But the key person here is Hilary Benn.
How worried are you that the compromise position might be that the city deal in Belfast and in the northwest go ahead, and it's the two rural deals that suffer?
That would be totally unacceptable. That would cause a huge problem and a rift in politics between London and the Stormont Assembly. That cannot be the position. There are 4 deals on the table. Let's get them all over the line.
Yesterday, it emerged that in a 7-year period up to 2022, the Causeway Coast and Glens region attracted just 2 inward investment jobs supported by InvestNI. The region is also suffering from demographic change. Its population is getting older. The number of young people working in the area is dropping faster than anywhere else in Northern Ireland. Projects like this in Cushendall are aimed at keeping working-age people in the area. This former police station is now a working hub, and the volunteers running it were hoping to expand the premises. Give me an example of some of the people that are already using this centre that perhaps might have moved away if it wasn't here.
Yeah, we have an IT business on the bottom floor here who would otherwise be in Belfast. We have a tech business as well who are going from strength to strength. We have a member of the Google team working on site as well who has confirmed to us that the internet speed here in Cushendall and the Glens of Antrim is quicker than that in Dublin city centre also. We want to keep the really talented people who care so much about this area in this area. You know, whenever they go to the shop at lunchtime, they're using the local shop. Whenever they are going home, they don't have an hour to wait to get there, and they're bringing their kids to the local clubs, the GA clubs, the golf club, the sailing club, whatever else. And we want to make sure that we keep our talented young people here living in the Glens, caring for it.
So if the Chancellor's watching tonight, I doubt she is, but what's your message?
This cut to, you know, the future of business here in Causeway Coast and Glens is of massive significance. We had an opportunity to bring so many new people into work. We had the opportunity to bring new businesses online, and for the small saving that the UK government will get from the cut, they're actually cutting off their nose to spite their face, because what could have been generated would have been far in excess of that.
The North Coast is home to some of our most iconic tourist hotspots, with millions of visitors each year. But many of those visiting the area don't spend any money here, and some of the planned projects were targeted at changing that.
So the plan is for a greenway that would travel all the way from Portrush to the Giant's Causeway via Port Ballantrae and Bushmills. The more destinations we have and things for tourists to do on the North Coast, the more important it is for them to stay overnight, because they can't do it all in the one day. So therefore you get bed nights, you get an economic legacy from them staying, buying some accommodation, paying for food, all that sort of thing. So we get a better economic footprint left behind for each tourist that comes to the North Coast.
So there's about £100 million on the table, or at risk now, depending on how you look at it. 36 million of that is from the UK government. What kind of economic catalyst would that money be here?
One of the innovation projects at the University of Ulster is a £22 million investment in drug and food discovery project. We've already got a major American multinational company that has capital value of $177 billion US, visited Coleraine this week, very excited about that project. That project alone has the potential to create an economic benefit for the region of £250 million over the next 30 years and create 20 jobs. That project's now at risk because the growth deal funding from the UK government is now paused.
As the UK government considers walking away from the £36 million commitment, these City Deal projects, the funding partners, the local council and the Stormont executive are all caught between a rock and a hard place.
Darren Marshall reporting, and Conor Murphy is still with me. We saw ministers and MLAs standing shoulder to shoulder with council representatives at the start of that report. Can you just confirm that the executive's contribution to the City Deal remains on the table?
Yes, absolutely. And the only decision is the one which is a temporary decision, has been taken by Treasury. I think it was a terrible decision. I think was very badly communicated as well. Gladly, they have backed off in terms of the city deals for Belfast and for Derry. But we need them to take a quick decision and give confidence back. I mean, I think the piece that we've just seen on the film from the Causeway Coast shows you what that is all about. It's a multiplier effect. It's an investment from the executive, from the British government. It's private sector coming on board with that. And it's a lasting legacy of investment in rural areas, which haven't seen that much investment and which have enormous potential. So to put all of that in jeopardy, both in terms of the Causeway deal and the South West deal in the councils down from Mana, Omagh, Armagh, Banbridge, Craigavon councils is a huge damaging decision from Treasury, and they need to reverse out of that very, very quickly to restore confidence in the people in the councils that have been working on it, the government departments, but also the private sector interest in that as well.
So I just want to be absolutely clear I understand you correctly. You're saying that the executive's money remains committed, remains on the table no matter what happens. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So then what about the pressure you can bring to bear on the UK government to make sure that it doesn't back away from its previous commitment?
Absolutely, because this is a multiplier effect.
Of course.
And if the British government take their money off the table, then that substantially reduces.
And in this case, it's 36 million.
Yes, and a larger amount for the South West deal.
Yes.
So, of course, fortunately, that the week they began to announce that, Keith Archibald was over along with the First and Deputy First Ministers. They were able to apply immediate pressure on the Treasury, and we've consistently applied that pressure. Keith Archibald's in very regular contact with them to tell them to reverse out of this decision. The executive have a unanimous view in relation to that. That's why we went out and stood with the councils on Monday to express our support for them. And I think this is something that has been a very poor decision by Treasury, and I think they need to come off it as quickly as possible, because the ongoing uncertainty damages, as has been said on your film piece, the private sector potential of investment there as well.
And just finally, Minister, on that point that Darren put to Gregory Campbell, what if the compromise position from the Treasury is that the two city deals can go ahead, but the two other deals which are currently paused fall by the wayside? He said, no way can that happen. Do you stand shoulder to shoulder with him on that?
I find myself in the rare position of agreeing with Gregory Campbell, and I absolutely agree with him on that. The growth deals in those council areas are as important as the city deals, and they have the potential for a significant uplift and a legacy for those areas, which is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and they cannot be lost.
The Economy Minister, Conor Murphy, speaking to me earlier. The DUP held its party conference last weekend. Gavin Robinson's first as leader, and in his speech he promised a new approach focused on getting outcomes that better the lives of all our people. Someone else calling for a new approach is the DUP's former Director of Policy, Lee Reynolds. He wrote an article last week in which he argued the party needs to adopt wide-ranging changes to halt its decline. To discuss that, I'm joined by the Belfast Telegraph's political editor, Suzanne Breen, and the former DUP Special Advisor, David Graham. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining us on the programme tonight. Suzanne, when it's Lee Reynolds saying the DUP is a negative brand, how seriously does the party need to take it?
Well, Lee Reynolds is somebody with years' experience at the heart of the DUP. He is not a major outside critic of the party. He knows it inside out. He was a former SPAD. He was Director of Policy. And this is not all in the distant past. Lee Reynolds was the campaign director for Philip Brett, the DUP's North Belfast MLA in July's Westminster election. So his experience is very, very recent. I have talked to a lot of people in the DUP about what Lee Reynolds said, and I have found nobody who disagrees wholeheartedly with him. They don't agree with everything he said, but certainly some of the views he expressed ring true. Now, the only criticism that I have heard of Lee Reynolds is that he doesn't have experience himself of winning elections. He was co-opted into 2 council seats, and he himself hasn't won an election. That's the only criticism I have heard, but people definitely respect his views. They respect his intellect and his ability.
David, the timing of this lengthy, detailed intervention was no accident, presumably. Why do you think Mr Reynolds decided the run-up to Gavin Robinson's first party conference was the time to make the case for wholesale change?
Well, look, I think he probably gave Gavin a little bit of wriggle room in many ways, Mark, because Gavin clearly knows that the party requires reform. He said that in his 4,000 words at the weekend. So the timing is probably based upon allowing Gavin to express certain viewpoints on Saturday, but I think also he knows that it's newsworthy given the time of year in terms of the conference. So there is a tactic to it, there's a motivation, but Suzanne's right in everything she says, and I think probably as a former member of the party I would agree with a high percentage of it. But this isn't the first time. I think we'll recall, and Suzanne will keep me right, within the last 2-3 years, Peter Robinson did a whole forensic analysis of the entire party and come up with a number, I think, into the hundreds of recommendations. And as far as I'm aware, that has never been enacted. So Lee will be aware of the inner dynamics of the party, and I think he has recognised that the party can't continue as it is.
Let's just take a look at a few of Lee Reynolds' thoughts in detail. The first one here, the 2024 Westminster campaign failed. It was apocalypse almost. The campaign prioritised 3 seats. The party lost 2 of them and another it had not expected. I mean, that is a brutal assessment, isn't it, Suzanne?
It is brutal. And it is very, very accurate. The defeat of Ian Paisley in North Antrim wasn't on the agenda for anybody, not just Ian Paisley, but everybody that I spoke to in the party thought he would comfortably hold that seat. Nobody thought that Sammy Wilson's majority would be down. I think it was down by about 5,000. Gregory Campbell's majority was down by 4,000, and Gregory hung on by his fingernails in East Derry. And I think you would have to say that, unless there was some United Unionist candidate, Sinn Féin will take that seat next time. So the DUP has many, many major challenges that it is facing, and it needs to come up with actions and answers.
I mean, that is a brutal bit of language, isn't it? But is it a truism? Will people within the party recognise it? Apocalypse almost?
Well, I mean, the figures speak for themselves. I mean, they literally, and I think, Suzanne, you and I spoke about this offline, they lost left, right and centre. They lost to the right in North Antrim to the traditional TV. They lost to the centre in South Antrim to Robin Swan, and then lost to the left to Source Eastwood and Lagan Valley. And, I mean, setting aside all the various external factors, to think that North Antrim and Lagan Valley wouldn't be DUP seats would have been unthinkable even a year ago. And I think, as Suzanne highlights as well, East Londonderry and Sammy Wilson's seat in East Antrim were much, much closer than anyone would have expected. And I think, whatever way you look at it, there's no way of shining that result. It was a disaster.
Lee Reynolds focuses on communications and selling the party. It's interesting. Let's just look at this second line we've picked out of a fairly lengthy article, it has to be said. Our communications model is completely outdated. It's trapped in the Mandelsonian model of the early 2000s. It's hyper-centralised. Its shortcomings were fully displayed in the RHI crisis, word games and parsing that always failed and made public perceptions worse. Again, he does not miss and hit the wall.
No, he doesn't, and I think that he is right. I mean, one criticism that you would hear from DUP representatives, from councillors, from MLAs and even from MPs is that perhaps the party does need to be more proactive with the media. A lot of time representatives will say that they want to appear in programmes, they want to talk to journalists, and they quite simply aren't allowed to. And really the DUP needs to open up a little bit more and allow its members to expand their views and build their profiles.
And David, let's just look at the third line we've pulled out, because this is about succession planning. Lee Reynolds talks about our candidates. He says we've no succession planning in place. Succession planning at all levels needs to be built in, especially as the DUP is no longer the first call for unionist talent and has seen it drift away. I mean, that is an acceptance of the pressure the party is coming under from other parties, as you've just said, left, right and centre.
And look, I think with respect to some well-seasoned members of the DUP, elected members of the DUP, Gavin needs to make difficult decisions. And one of those difficult decisions is that you've probably got at least three MPs who, need to be in their last term if the party wants to modernise and move forward. And that's no disrespect to, the likes of Gregory Campbell and Sammy Wilson. But I think, Suzanne and I have spoken before about this sort of idea of the toxicity of the DUP. I think that's a very unfair perception. But I think, and I've seen it even with respect to people within the media who will go back to things that have been said and done as far back as the 70s and 80s and 90s. And I think, we talk about sort of freeing ourselves from the shackles of the past. I think, any organisation needs to look at the old guard and respectfully look at how you transition until, if you look at the party conference on Saturday, you know, the star performers, the like of Cheryl Brownlee, Deborah Armstrong, you know, Gordon Lyons, Paul Given and Emma Littleton-McGilly, what they have in common is that they're all 40 and under, and I think that that's the key thing that the DUP have recognised.
Suzanne, I just want to pull out one last line here that we've graphicked up, and it's about change, because Gavin Robinson referenced this on the day as well, of course, in his leader speech. As a bare minimum, implement the last set of internal reform proposals. This was led by Peter Robinson and is a decent package. It has some flaws, but some change is better than none. So what he's really saying there is, look, there were plans for change and bringing the party up to date in the past, but they were never actually delivered on.
And we have to ask why that is the case. In terms of the talent drift that there's been from the DUP, I mean, David Graham is a perfect example of that. He is a former SPAD, he was a councillor, and yet, you know, he left the party. He took a senior role in football in Britain. He shouldn't have been allowed to go. The party should have kept him, had a role for him that meant that he stayed there and thought that he had a future there. The DUP cannot afford to lose people that are good communicators and that really are representative of the average person in Northern Ireland. The party needs to reach out much more. In terms of succession planning, the DUP has been disastrous. We saw with Sinn Féin how well that was managed. Michelle O'Neill replacing Martin McGuinness, Mary Lou McDonald stepping in to fill the shoes that Jerry Adams left, and doing so really, really successfully. DUP's not managed to do that.
You can thank Suzanne for those kind words afterwards, David. I just want to pick up on something else that Lee Reynolds says, because you know the party organisation very well. He says this, he argues there should be a restructuring of the party machine to include a general secretary and a new party chief of staff, because the current chief executive model role setup doesn't work, he says. Is that something that will strike a chord? Is that kind of wholesale change something that's actually necessary?
Look, I think the DUP has always been, like a lot of parties, has been very centralised in its power base. And with that, power base becomes a level of control. The challenge that becomes then is who is controlling policy, shaping policy, who is controlling communication, who is controlling right up to appointing ministers. Is it always people who are elected? And look, I am not bothered in many ways about whether someone is elected or not. If they're involved in shaping the party, it should be people who are best for the job and the best fit. And I think that one of the real challenges, going back to the succession planning, is if you look what Sinn Féin did with Pat Cullen and Fermanagh South Tyrone, finding someone hadn't worked in a party consistency office and sort of built themselves up the ladder. They went and found someone. And I think what Lee has said, or is clearly is trying to say, is that the DUP at the moment is not a brand that is strong enough to attract talent from out with the party.
Suzanne, Gavin Robinson talked in his leader speech on Saturday about how members of the public will see change internally and externally. We will see the party doing things differently in future. Now, we've talked on this programme a lot tonight about collaboration. We saw Gregory Campbell not batting an eyelid when Darren Marshall asked him about working with Kiva Archibald, the Sinn Féin minister, to restore that funding for Causeway Coast and Glens. Is that the kind of change you think he's talking about?
Yes, I think it is, and it was a very positive tone from Gregory Campbell. But I think the problem for the DUP is that Gavin talked about a new approach, and yet what did we see after his speech on Saturday? We saw a few days later that the Education Minister goes and meets the LCC, a group which represents the Red Hand Commando, the UDA, the UVF, people that are not, some of whom in the past, involved in nefarious deeds in the here and now today, and yet they're consulted about education. That doesn't look like a new approach. OK,
we've got to leave it there. We're out of time. Thanks both very much indeed for coming in to join us. That's it for tonight. I'll be back at the weekend with a busy Sunday politics when we'll be reporting from the Ulster Unionist Party and Conservative Party conferences, and the Sinn Féin President Mary Lou McDonald will be joining me live from Dublin. That's at the usual time of 10 o'clock on BBC One. Do join me for that. For now, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching. Good night.